Hello, I'm the Reverend Carol Hovis, and I'm here today with the Reverend Fu Shroeder, an inductee into the 2008 Marin Women's Hall of Fame in the area of religion. Hello, Fu. It's
Hello, Carol.
Good to be with you today.
You.
I thought maybe we would start with a brief history of where you were born and what your childhood was like.
Well, I come from the Bay Area. I was born in South San Francisco. We used to say our town didn't have its own name. So it was basically a suburb that grew up after the war. So initially, when I was little, I thought I was Italian because everyone in South City was Italian, the mayor and the principal and the teachers and so on. So I really appreciated growing up in an older civilization in a way, because a lot of the Italians who were there had been there for a very long time, and they grew vegetables and raised horses and animals, and so I think of that as actually being a very important part of my early sense of how to be a human being, or to live in society or community.
As you look back at that time in your life, what are some of the factors that led you to choose the path of becoming a Zen Buddhist priest?
Yeah. There's a ceremony that we do as we train as Zen Buddhists, and it's called becoming a head student. And the first talk you give publicly as head student is called Way Seeking Talk. And that's the very question, like, how did you get here? What brought you? What are the factors in your life that brought you to this place of ordaining and being a Buddhist? I don't know what the right word is. I guess devotee, I suppose. But so for me, the earliest memory I think that led to identifying myself as a Buddhist was connecting with someone I perceived, although I wouldn't have had the words, as a holy man. And of all the odd things, this holy man was an Episcopalian. He was a bishop of San Francisco. His name was Bishop James Pike. And we were in this little suburban church, St. Elizabeth's, and Bishop Pike would come to do the confirmations. So he came, and my parents were hosting that particular visit, so we had him in our backyard, and he and I played ping pong.
Wow.
And I remember him so clearly because he seemed like the most present, aware, and also the other piece that was really potent in him was pain. There was a pain that was not, I don't think I'd seen in a human being in that way, or recognized. So I was about 12. I think it was a very formative age to encounter someone who was on the path, who was really seeking with everything he had to find resolution of, and I don't think it was just his own suffering, but I think suffering as a universal issue for all of us.
So from that experience with an Episcopal priest, then how to Zen Buddhism?
Well, there's a lot of, the path actually goes around the block and through the buildings. And so not having really a spiritual mentor that appeared at that time, I went through a lot of confusion for a long time, actually. And I left going to church because I didn't have to. My parents didn't insist, and I was saying I don't want to, and they allowed me to. Fine. I think I'm doing the same thing with my daughter now. Well, I won't make you do something you don't want to do. So I pulled away from anything that would look like church, and also began entering the, secular humanistic education. It's our common and defended way of explaining the world to our children is through thermodynamics and physics and chemistry and so on, and I was fascinated by all of that. And I think I turned my energy toward science. I wanted to be a biology teacher. That was my aspiration. By the time I got through high school, I wanted to be a teacher, and I wanted to teach science. So I think whatever those inspirations were being channeled into understanding the world in scientific evolutionary terms. However, at some point in the course of wanting to find my emotional home, like where do I live as a person? What kind of person am I? You know, where do I belong? That narrow identity wasn't holding enough of me. So I think the pain that I began to feel, and I think that's why James Pike, you know, became a connector for me, was unavoidable in my 20s. And I actually went back. At that point, I had moved myself to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, at the age of 21. After college, I moved to Jackson Hole to live on a ranch, and all new for me. I've never been. I mean, I arrived in Jackson Hole with 2 white suitcases. You know, it was not a form I was familiar with, and I learned pretty fast and got my jeans and my backpack and stuff. But so that just shifting my world by changing worlds was one approach I took. But then sometime in the course of living in Jackson Hole, this same, what now I would call a spiritual question, rearose, and I went to find an Episcopal priest. So
in Jackson Hole?
In Jackson Hole. So I went to the beautiful little church that was there in the middle of town, and I met with an older gentleman, and I had written a little essay about what is God, and all these questions I had, and made my best effort at this essay. And I'm not sure, at the time I thought, after speaking with him, that he didn't know. And I would be less harsh now. I'd say maybe it was, you know, obviously something that one doesn't just give an answer to. It's, you know, and he was kind. So that part was clear. But wanting the answer, I wanted the answer to my question. You know, that was part of what was driving me. So I walked away, and I think I didn't really re-engage again with the Episcopalians, other than, now I have a lot of friends who are Episcopalians, which is lovely. And it wasn't until another 7 years went by, and I had relocated back to the Bay Area, that I kind of accidentally came across the San Francisco Zen Center. And at that time, I was working in San Francisco, intending to go back to. I kept going back to college, get my teaching credential, and then move back to Wyoming and teach high school biology. So I kind of had a theme that I was trying to
keep getting back to.
Yeah, come to. So by the time I got back to the Bay Area, you know, I was older. I was a little more unhappy at the core. You know, things were not revealing themselves to me. And I had taken a job downtown with an organization called the Trust for Public Land, which is a land conservation, nonprofit, environmental organization. And that felt good. Felt like I was still on the same train, more or less, wanting to do something good, basically. I think that was the underlying theme from childhood was, I don't want all this bad stuff happening. Why is all this bad stuff happening? Why are they killing each other? Why did they shoot the president? Why did they kill Martin Luther King? Why? You know, why are we at war in Vietnam? So my whole young adulthood was about, you know, the horror of what was taking place on the world stage. The Trust for Public Land was a kind of think tank, and a lot of associations with you know, Mayor Moscone was involved, and Harvey Milk. We all would had these gatherings, and my job for the organization was actually videotaping. So I was the camera person, and I got to go in there with the camera and zoom in on these people who I thought were just remarkable human beings. And it was a real intimate privilege for me, because I wasn't in the scene, but I got to be really close. And so I was very intrigued by the people I saw through the lens, the abbot of the San Francisco Zen Center, the mayor of San Francisco, and these exciting people who were creating civic parties to celebrate a kind of sensibility or a new era, a renaissance of some sort. And the Buddhists seem to be right there in the mix, very upfront, intellectually and emotionally. And so I think my first contact with the Buddhists was really in the public forum.
Interesting.
And I was very drawn to the fact that you could be spiritual, activist, non-harming, non-violent, like Martin Luther King Jr. You could make a commitment to making social change without carrying weapons or, making the same mistake, replicating that error of violence and harm.
You've already mentioned several, but I'll ask this to see if there's anyone else that comes to mind. Anyone else along the way that was a great influence, for better or worse, which played a role in these decisions?
Well, to roll back to the beginnings, I think my father was the formative role model in the highest sense of a kind of person I so much still wish to be. I felt like, and of course this is through a child's eyes, but he was pretty consistent. My dad was raised in the Victorian era. I mean, he grew up with pony carts and high collars, and he was raised by Victorians, and he had a real dignity, and he was what I would call a gentleman, in a very good sense of the word. We weren't wealthy, so it wasn't attached to some kind of privileged class. In my own eyes, he was actually a maitre d'. So he went to work in a suit, beautiful suit, with a little silk hanky in his pocket and a tie, and his nails were always groomed, and his mustache was trimmed, and he was just a very handsome and kind-spoken and elegant human being, and he was my dad, so I'd look at him. He was a good cook. He'd be in the kitchen in a starched white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, making, enchiladas. He came from Texas, so and he was also a gardener. He kept our garden, was beautiful. There were flowers all around always, and each season he was out there growing these flowers and mowing the lawn. And so all of my earliest memories of my dad were of taking care of things. And our joke in the family was, if Dad was home, the house was impeccably kept, and if Mom was home, there was a little more chaos, and it means that we were all home too. And she was a good spirit as well, but I think Dad was in terms of what I think of as my spiritual life, he was the father that I honored, and when he died, we found he had very few possessions. He had his suits and shoes and the care of the house, but he didn't accumulate a lot of things. And there was a little side table next to the bed that had his stuff, nail clippers and his wallet. And in the wallet was a little clipping that I'd never seen that was about Jesus. It was a little poem about this simple man who never lived very far from his home. And it was just a very sweet little poem, and he'd had it in his wallet, as far as I know, for 20 years or something. So I felt like he never spoke about being a Christian. I don't think he ever even said anything about his inner beliefs. But my feeling about my dad was that was his inspiration or model, was this kind and simple person.
So Fu, as an inductee in the area of religion in the Women's Hall of Fame, what is your work that you do?
Well, I was very surprised by the call from Dr. Nahid Anga, who is a previous honoree in religion, because I think all of us probably don't reflect very much on what we've done or what we do that would be honored, or I don't see my life in accumulative terms. It's like today I have to be over at Drake High School and so on. So it's very much day-to-day living, and so it was a wonderful gift to me. Actually, this is my 60th year, and when Dr. Anga made the call and asked me to go through the process of reflecting on my life, or what I have been doing, and where I am now, what I've accumulated. You know, it was a wonderful thing to be able to do that. And I really think everyone ought to do that at some point, you know, whether it's a memoir or whatever. And then I also had the great privilege of inviting 3 other people to see what do they think I've been doing, who are part of my life. So, you know, I asked you to write one of the letters, and the abbess of the Zen Center, who's been a long time friend and teacher, I asked her. And then I asked one of the young teachers from my daughter's school, who I had invited to go with me for this program I had created to do a cross-cultural children's program with the Navajo. So several years ago, I came in contact with some Navajo elders, and I invited them to bring their children, and I invited some of our children to have a camp at Green Gulch for a week together, which turned out to be just an extraordinary gift to everybody involved. So I had fundraised for that and paid their transportation and so on, and bought some tents and got some teachers involved. So then we were invited to come and visit them the following year. And we caravanned some of the parents with the kids. We had about 11 cars in a parade all through the Navajo land together with the Navajo. And we camped together, and we went and heard the stories about all the land and where they've been for such a long time. And so one of those teachers that I had invited to go was the third invitation. So I got to read these recommendations and how they saw me, you know, as somebody just running around getting ice and tents, putting up tents and so on, but to be described as a person who had actually made that effort to create that program, and with you to have, you know, been very devoted to the interfaith work, and to the point of, you know, going through the ranks and becoming the president of the Interfaith Council, and then feeling a great privilege to be in that relationship to all of the people on the council. And then at Zen Center, over the years, starting off making beds and cleaning toilets and everything else that we all do as novices, eventually over the years becoming the director and then the head of practice. So I feel like just how I lived my life, little by little, I grew up and I got to be an adult, and I have had this wonderful opportunity to be an adult in a religious community. I went there because I was in pain, and I am not in pain.
As you look back also over your life thus far, were there any particular challenges that you felt needed to be overcome, and did you overcome them? And if so, how?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The primary operating system of Buddhism, which I think is no different than any other tradition or discipline, is something we call precepts. And it has to do with my relationship to other people, well, also by extension, other living things. And it's all based on not harming. So, you know, we articulate them in words like not killing. And I promise not to kill you, which is, you know, what this basically represents is I've made that promise by vowing that I'm not going to kill you. I'm not going to steal from you, lie to you, sexualize you, intoxicate you, slander you, hold anything back from you, be angry at you longer than I have to, you know, to resolve the issues, and so on. So they're 10 very clear promises that we make. And I think the reason they're there is because we struggle with those things. And my struggles as a young person, I think particularly once I left home, but it's certainly the seeds were there earlier, were around lying, you know. Telling lies was kind of so much easier than, you know, like facing the facts that maybe I didn't like somebody or whatever. But to deal with the world in terms of just fabricating whatever sounded good was, I just figured out how to do that. So I feel like I was pretty good at fabricating or white lying. And I don't think I was I never went to court and perjured myself, but, you know, had the opportunity arisen, I don't know. killing, I mean, I could go through all kinds of ideas about how that was so, whether emotionally or in terms of what I ate and so on. And I think the big one for me was sexualizing, because I had a lot of energy as a young woman, and not a lot of cultural norms were not being maintained. By the time I hit college, it was 1967, and the world had just blown up in terms of morality, what classical morality or what it meant. It was like, get rid of those ideas are just repressive, and free love and free speech, and you know, the campuses were exciting, and I was on one of them. And so I feel like my generation basically took on a really different understanding of morality that wasn't immoral. It was more like amoral, trying to figure out together what was okay, what wasn't okay. It's sort of like, if it feels good, it's okay, kind of situational ethics and stuff. So, you know, being a product of that era, I feel like it really, on the personal level, it wreaked havoc with what I just talked about, my dad, who was a very loyal, and, you know, his word was his pledge, that kind of honorable man. I can't imagine him lying, you know, or not sexual. I wouldn't say my dad didn't sexualize, because he had an eye for the ladies, you know. I could watch him as a beautiful woman would walk by, he'd be like, whoa. So I appreciated his beauty. His sense of beauty was intact, but I know his loyalty was profound, and so did my mom, and we all knew that, and I had no doubt about it. So somehow the enactment of his vows or promises was very much the inspiration, and I didn't go there. So it took a long time for me to say inside myself, that's where I need to go. I need to understand these precepts. I need to understand what is ethics, what is it, the truth? What is it to speak the truth? What is sexualizing? Am I using my sexual energy to appropriate favors to myself, or advantages, or even subtly? You know, is this something I'm abusing the power that we all have as sexual creatures? So just coming into a good, kind of healthy and wholesome and valid relationship with my own energetic body and life has been the greatest challenge for me.
Do you have any particular words of wisdom for others, especially young girls, regarding life choices and challenges?
Yeah. Well, I have a wonderful opportunity of speaking to a young girl in my home, because I have a about to be 15-year-old. I adopted, as you know, I adopted a child who was a month old, at-risk baby, and my partner Grace and I adopted Sabrina. And you know, I was 45 years old, so having a baby was long past some consideration I had, and I quite honestly could say I never really wanted to have children. I grew up in a big family, and it seemed like a lot of trouble, you know, to raise kids. It's like, what's that for? I had other ideas that I wanted to do, but by the time I said yes to taking on this child, it was like, it was just, she came as a miracle, and as the most important thing that was next to happen to me. So trying to say anything to her or to any teenager has proven to be, I've actually gone back to prayer as one of the primary tools of hoping that things I say to her, that she's actually heard them, that she might remember them, that you know, she's going to have her own choices to make, and the most I can do, it's kind of like you keep just putting the plate down on the table and saying, you know, here's some food if you'd like to eat it. It's really good. I think it's good. I've eaten this food, and I want to offer it to you. But I know she has to decide for herself, and so far I would say that she's made excellent choices. She's a wonderful human being. She, you know, it's not a straight shot. It's not like I tell her and then she's got it. You know, we all know that as parents. I think a lot of people have influenced her life. And I think the choice that I've been able to make as a parent or mentor is to make sure there are other influences on her of people that I really trust and value. And I can see where their integrity is coming from. So her teachers have been just spectacular. The parents of her friends, she's chosen well. The friends she's chosen, we're friends with their parents. And so I feel like this community, as Hillary Clinton said, takes a village. It takes a village to raise a child. And so the more we can create intact villages and contexts for our children and can help install the values that we hold dear, I think that's where the hope lies for helping the young people. And another reason I appreciate what the Women's Hall of Fame is doing by bringing mentors, examples forward and showing young people, like, well, here's some ways to be in this world, here's some choices you can make, and not just the commercial, you know, things that we all find so, you know, unsatisfying. So in terms of specific advice, I think the thing I've experienced most with kids is, first of all, they're really sharp. And they know when you're giving them good stuff and when it's nonsense. So being honest with them and speaking, you know, the truth as best you can and letting them know it's just the best you can come up with at the moment. But also, I have been amazingly inspired by the opportunities I've had to teach the children to meditate. Without giving it any kind, it's not Buddhist meditation, it's not Christian meditation, it's not any denomination. It's like, what happens when we just sit quietly and allow ourselves to be calm? How does that support your life?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful to be with you today.
Thanks, Carol.